When I'm big, I'll be your wife." The mountain man laughed. 20 years later, they reunited. The mountain village was quiet that morning, wrapped in the soft mist that rolled down from the high peaks. Birds sang faintly in the distance, and the river gurgled over the stones, carrying the fresh, cold scent of snow from the upper mountains. Children ran along the narrow dirt paths, laughing as they chased each other between the wooden cottages. Among them, a small girl with bright, curious eyes and a tangle of hair tied loosely with a ribbon skipped along the edge of the riverbank. Her name was Amina. Amina was a bold child. Even though she was small, she moved as if the whole mountain belonged to her. She loved the rivers, the tall pines, and the hidden trails that only she seemed to find. But there was one person in the village who had always fascinated her more than anyone else. The man everyone called Karim, or simply the Mountain Man. Karim was tall, broad-shouldered, and tanned from the sun, with hands that looked strong enough to carry the heaviest logs. His eyes, dark and deep, always seemed to be watching over the village, quiet but alert, like he knew every secret of the mountains. Amina had known Karim for as long as she could remember. When she was little, he had shown her how to climb the rocks near the river safely. He had taught her which berries were good to eat and which flowers would make the best tea. But what fascinated Amina most wasn't just his strength or his knowledge. It was the way he laughed, loud and free, and how he always listened, as if nothing else mattered when someone was speaking to him. One bright morning, Amina ran to him as he was stacking firewood near his small cottage. She had been thinking about something important, something she wanted to say for days. Karim noticed her running toward him, and his laugh rang out before she even spoke. "What are you up to now, little troublemaker?" he asked, his voice deep but warm. "I have something to tell you," Amina said, her small fists clenched with excitement. She stopped in front of him, catching her breath, her eyes shining. Karim looked down at her, raising an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" he asked, amused. Amina stood on tiptoe. "When I'm big, I'll be your wife," she said proudly. For a moment, Karim stared at her in surprise. Then he laughed, the sound echoing across the mountains. "Your wife? You're just a little girl," he said, shaking his head. "Do you know what you are saying?" Amina nodded seriously. "Yes, I will grow up and then I will be your wife. I promise." She lifted her chin, as if this promise was the most important thing in the world. Karim couldn't help but laugh again. He crouched down to her level. "A very big promise from a very small person," he said. "But I must warn you, that is a long, long way from now. You still have to learn to tie your shoes and eat your vegetables." Amina giggled. "I already do both," she insisted. "And I will keep learning everything else too, so you will see. One day I will be your wife." Karim chuckled, shaking his head, but inside he felt something strange, a warmth that made him smile in a way he hadn't smiled for a long time. He ruffled her hair gently. "All right, little one, we will see what happens when you grow up. But for now, come help me carry these logs. You might be small, but even small hands are useful." Amina jumped up happy, and together they lifted the smaller logs, stacking them carefully. As they worked, they talked about simple things: the birds that nested in the tall pine, the river that had changed after the rains, and the clouds that sometimes hid the mountains completely. Karim listened, and Amina chattered without pause, the kind of childlike confidence that only comes from feeling safe and loved. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened. Every time Amina visited, Karim would take her to places no other child dared to go. He taught her how to spot animal tracks in the mud, how to pick the best wildflowers, and even how to whistle so loud it echoed across the valley. Amina, for her part, insisted on telling him every detail of her small adventures, from the way her new shoes squeaked in the rain to the funny faces her friends made in school. Villagers often noticed them together. Some would smile, remembering their own childhood friendships. Others shook their heads, thinking how unusual it was for a young girl to spend so much time with a grown man, though no one could deny Karim's gentle care. There was nothing improper, only a bond of trust and warmth that grew day by day. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Amina and Karim sat on a large rock overlooking the river. The water flowed quietly, carrying the reflection of the sky and the mountains. "Karim," Amina said, her voice a little quieter than usual, "do you remember what I told you?" "Which promise?" he asked with a laugh, though he already knew the answer. "The one about me becoming your wife when I'm big," she said, looking serious now, her small hands folded in her lap. Karim smiled gently. "I remember," he said. "And do you still mean it?" Amina nodded firmly. "Of course, I have never forgotten. Even when I'm grown, I will remember this promise. I will keep it." He looked at her thoughtfully. It was a funny idea, a child promising such things, but there was a sincerity in her eyes that he could not ignore. It reminded him of the simplicity of life, of a time when hope and laughter were all that mattered. He ruffled her hair again and said softly, "Very well, little one. I will remember this too, but promise me one thing." "What?" "Promise me that you will always be brave and always follow your heart. No matter what happens, never forget to laugh, never forget the mountains, and never forget yourself." Amina nodded. "I promise," she said. And with that, the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the village. Amina ran down the path toward her home, turning back to wave at Karim one last time. He waved too, a quiet smile on his face, feeling a strange certainty that this little girl, with her bold words and fearless heart, would leave a mark on his life that time could never erase. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and Amina's visits became less frequent as her family had to move temporarily to a nearby town. But every time she returned, she would run straight to Karim, repeating her promise with the same determination as the first day. And every time he would laugh, ruffle her hair, and remind her to keep her heart brave. The village continued its life, calm and unhurried, with children playing, animals grazing, and the mountains standing silently around them. But in the quiet moments, Karim would sometimes look toward the distant paths, wondering about the little girl who had promised to be his wife. And Amina, far away at times, would think of the tall man with gentle eyes who had taught her the mountain's secrets, and she would smile, knowing that some promises, even the most innocent ones, could last a lifetime. Even as the seasons changed, the snow covering the peaks in winter, the rivers thawing in spring, the flowers blooming in summer, and the leaves falling in autumn, the bond between them stayed. A simple promise spoken by a child had woven itself quietly into the fabric of their lives, something neither time nor distance could erase. It was a promise that, no one knew yet, would shape the course of both their lives in ways no one could imagine. And so, in that quiet mountain village, under the endless sky and beside the flowing river, the story of a little girl who promised to become a mountain man's wife began. It was a story of laughter, innocence, and a connection that was pure and unbroken, a connection that would one day, many years later, bring them back together, in a way neither could have foreseen. Years passed in the quiet mountain village, and life moved with the slow, steady rhythm of the seasons. Amina grew taller, her bright eyes now carrying the quiet confidence of a young girl becoming a teenager. Her laughter was still lively, her curiosity still boundless, but the carefree days of childhood had begun to mix with the first taste of responsibility and the awareness of the wider world. Her family had to move to a nearby town for her father's work. At first, Amina was unhappy. The town was busier, louder, and full of strangers. The streets were paved with stones that echoed under the feet of carts and bicycles, and the air smelled different, less of pine and river, more of smoke and bread from bakeries. But still, every time she could, she returned to the mountains, to the river, and to Karim, the mountain man who had once laughed at her bold promise. Karim had also changed in those years. The boyish charm had given way to a calm strength. His days were now filled with responsibilities, maintaining the village paths, helping neighbors and guiding travelers who came to see the mountains. His laughter was not as frequent as before, but when it came, it was deeper, warmer, carrying the quiet pride of someone who had seen and done much. Amina and Karim's meetings became less frequent as well. Distance made their connection fragile, but the promise they had shared remained unspoken yet alive in both their hearts. Amina often thought of Karim when she was in the town, in moments when the city felt too busy, too fast. She remembered the way he had shown her the safest paths, the taste of wild berries, and the echo of their laughter by the river. Those memories were her treasures, and she carried them like a small, secret flame. As a teenager, Amina began to notice new things about the world and about herself. School was sometimes difficult, but she learned quickly. She loved books, especially stories about mountains, rivers, and people who overcame challenges. She was brave in her own way, just as Karim had taught her to be. She would climb small hills with friends, explore streams, and sometimes sneak away to find quiet places where no one could disturb her thoughts. But through it all, her mind would wander back to the mountains and to the man who had laughed at her promise so long ago. Meanwhile, Karim noticed that the village itself was changing. Some families moved away, new faces arrived, and the paths he knew so well began to look different. Yet, in all the changes, he remembered the little girl who had promised to be his wife. He often wondered what had become of her. Was she still brave? Did she still remember the mountains and the river? He would sometimes climb the rocks where they had first met and look toward the horizon, hoping to catch a glimpse of her familiar smile, though he never admitted it aloud. Life, however, had a way of keeping them apart. Amina's family became busy with their own responsibilities. Her father's work in the town meant they could not always return to the mountains. Friends, school, and new experiences filled her days, and though she thought of Karim often, she had to focus on growing up, learning, and becoming the young woman she was destined to be. Karim, too, had responsibilities. The village relied on him, and he could not simply wait for a child who had grown into a stranger. He trained younger villagers in climbing and survival skills, guided travelers who came seeking adventure, and helped with the work that kept the village safe. Yet in quiet moments he would sit by the river and think of her, the promise she had made echoing softly in his mind. Years became a rhythm of letters, rare visits, and silent memories. Sometimes Amina would write letters, though often too shy to send them. She would tell herself that one day she would return, that one day she would see him again. And Karim would hear about her in small ways, through the village gossip, travelers who mentioned her family, or the occasional note passed along by someone visiting from town. Each time he would smile quietly, his thoughts drifting back to a promise made long ago on a warm morning by the river. Teenage years brought new challenges for Amina. She learned about friendships and the importance of trust. She discovered that growing up was not just about becoming older. It was about making choices, facing fears, and understanding the value of people who truly cared for you. In her heart, Karim remained a symbol of strength, kindness, and trust, the man who had shown her that the world, even with its challenges, could be kind and protective. As the years went by, Amina began to notice how much she had changed, yet how much of her childhood self remained. She still loved the mountains, still remembered the river, and still held that promise quietly in her heart. She would sometimes close her eyes and imagine the tall man laughing, helping her carry logs and showing her the secret trails. It gave her comfort, a sense that even if life was confusing and the world was vast, some things remained constant. Karim, on the other hand, had grown into a respected figure in the village. He was strong and capable, but those who knew him best saw the gentle heart beneath the rugged exterior. He carried memories of Amina with him like a quiet song, one that never faded no matter how many seasons passed. His life was full of people who needed his help, but there was always a space in his thoughts reserved for the little girl with the bright eyes and bold promise. Occasionally, villagers would ask him about her. "Do you remember that little girl who promised to marry you?" They would tease, laughing softly. Karim would smile, his eyes distant, and say, "I remember." She was fearless. No one could tell if there was more in his heart, but those who knew him best understood that some bonds, no matter how far apart in time or distance, could never truly be broken. Amina faced her own challenges. The town offered opportunities, but it also brought worries. Schoolwork could be stressful, friends could be unkind, and growing up brought fears she had not known as a child. Yet, the memory of Karim and the mountains gave her courage. Whenever she felt unsure, she would think of his patient guidance, his laughter, and the way he trusted her to be brave. It reminded her that she could face difficulties with strength and resilience. Despite the years apart, fate seemed to have a quiet plan. Amina's family often returned to the mountains during holidays, and each time, the excitement of reunion with Karim grew stronger. She would think about the first promise she had made and wonder if he still remembered, if he had also kept a piece of that memory alive. Each reunion was a mixture of joy, nervousness, and nostalgia. They spoke less of promises now, for the bond had grown beyond words. Still, the unspoken connection was stronger than ever, rooted in shared experiences and deep mutual respect. Through it all, the mountains remained unchanged. The rivers still gurgled over the stones, the birds sang their songs, and the tall pines swayed in the wind. These were the constants in Amina's life, the anchors that reminded her of where she came from and who had once laughed at her bold, innocent words. Karim, too, found peace in the mountains, comfort in their quiet beauty, and strength in the memories of the little girl who had promised to be his wife. By the time Amina reached young adulthood, she had grown into a confident, kind, and intelligent woman. The memories of her childhood adventures, of laughter, of riverbanks and mountain paths, shaped her into someone strong yet gentle. She had learned patience, courage, and the value of promises, lessons that came not from books, but from the bond she had shared with Karim. Karim, now fully grown into a man admired by the village, often looked at the mountains with a mixture of pride and longing. He had lived a life of responsibility and service, but the thought of Amina lingered. Her promise had become a quiet part of his life, a story he could recall with a smile when he was alone, reminding him that even the smallest words could leave the deepest marks. And though life had pulled them apart, fate had not forgotten. The bond formed in childhood, full of laughter, trust, and innocence, had grown quietly but firmly in both their hearts. The promise of the little girl to become his wife had transformed over the years, from a playful statement into a memory that carried hope, longing, and the gentle certainty that some connections were meant to last forever. As Amina returned to the mountains one last time before leaving permanently for her studies, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Would Karim remember her as vividly as she remembered him? Would the mountains, their river, and the trails still hold the magic they once did? She approached the familiar paths with a racing heart, ready to face the man who had been a part of her childhood, ready to see if the promise of her past still had a place in the present. Karim, meanwhile, waited quietly near the river where they had first shared their bold words, his heart quietly hopeful. Time had changed them both, yet the bond remained unbroken. The man who had once laughed at a child's playful promise now felt a mix of anticipation and wonder. Life had been long, full of challenges, yet it had led him here, to this moment when the past and present would meet again. And so, the years of separation, growth, and quiet longing set the stage for a reunion neither of them fully expected, yet both had secretly hoped for. The mountain man and the girl who had promised him her heart were on the path of destiny, their story far from over, with the promise of something more waiting just beyond the horizon. Years had passed since Amina and Karim had last seen each other. The mountain village had changed only slightly. The river still ran over the stones, and the tall pines still swayed in the wind. But the people had grown older, and the little girl who once ran along the paths was now a young woman. She had returned to the mountains after many years, invited by her family to attend the village festival, an annual event celebrating the beauty of the mountains, the river, and the life they nurtured. Amina felt her heart race as the familiar path wound up the hillside. She remembered every rock, every turn, and even the small wooden bridge where she had once balanced carefully with Karim watching her. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and she felt a mixture of nostalgia and excitement. Her mind wandered back to the laughter of her childhood and the bold promise she had made, that she would be Karim's wife. Karim, meanwhile, had heard of the festival for weeks. He had known that many villagers would come, including families who had moved away years ago. Yet his thoughts were focused on one visitor in particular. Would she return? Would the little girl, now grown into a beautiful woman, remember him, remember the mountains, and remember their promise? The day of the festival arrived, bright and warm. Villagers gathered along the river, preparing food, arranging decorations, and setting up stalls for crafts and games. Children ran through the fields, laughter echoing across the mountains, while older villagers told stories of the past. Karim helped where he could, guiding travelers and lending a hand with preparations, but his eyes often drifted toward the distant path, hoping, waiting. And then, as if the mountains themselves had called her back, Amina appeared. She had grown taller, her eyes still bright with curiosity and courage. Her smile carried the same warmth that Karim remembered, and her presence seemed to light up the paths she once roamed freely as a child. The moment their eyes met, both felt a strange, sudden recognition, as if no years had passed at all. Karim's breath caught, and for a moment he could not speak. The young woman before him was no longer the child who had made a playful promise. She was confident, strong, and beautiful in a way that radiated from within. Yet the same spark he had remembered, the boldness, the laughter, the connection was there, shining clearly in her gaze. Amina, too, felt her heart leap. She remembered the tall man who had shown her the mountains, taught her to be brave, and laughed at her childhood promise. Now, seeing him again, she realized that the memory she had carried for so many years was alive, stronger than she had imagined. The river, the trees, and the rocks seemed to whisper that this reunion was meant to be. Their first words were hesitant, soft, as if testing whether the years had changed their bond. "Karim," Amina said quietly, unsure if he would remember the small girl who had spoken those bold words so long ago. He smiled, a mixture of amusement and emotion in his eyes. "Amina, you've grown," he said simply, yet the tone carried so much more, years of longing, memories, and unspoken feelings. I remembered the mountains," she admitted. "I remembered the river, and I remembered you." Karim's smile widened, and for the first time in many years he laughed freely. "I remembered you too," he said. "More than I thought possible." The sound echoed through the trees, carrying a warmth that reminded Amina of all the afternoons they had spent together, carrying logs, climbing rocks, and laughing by the river. They walked slowly through the festival, observing the familiar sights, hearing familiar sounds, yet everything felt different because they were seeing it together. Villagers noticed them and whispered softly, smiling at the reunion of two people whose bond had survived the passage of time. Some remembered the little girl's bold promise and marveled at how the years had not diminished the connection between them. As they walked, Karim took Amina to their favorite spot by the river, a quiet place where the water flowed gently over smooth stones and the trees offered shade. They sat together on the familiar rock, the same one where she had once promised to be his wife. The moment was quiet yet full of unspoken words. I can't believe it's been 20 years, Amina said softly. So much has happened, yet being here feels like I never left. Karim nodded. Time changes many things, he said, but some things stay the same. Like memories and like promises. He looked at her carefully, wondering if she would understand the deeper meaning behind his words. Amina smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. I never forgot, she whispered. Even when I was far away, even when life was busy and I had so many new things to learn, I never forgot what I promised. Karim's eyes softened, filled with emotion. Nor did I, he said quietly. I laughed at your words when you were small, but I always remembered. I remembered your courage, your heart, and the mountains we shared. For a while, they sat in silence, letting the river and the trees carry away the years of separation. The mountains seemed to embrace them, offering a sense of peace and continuity that no words could fully express. They spoke of the years apart, of experiences, of challenges and joys, each story building a bridge between the past and the present. As the festival continued around them, with music and laughter filling the air, Karim and Amina felt a connection that was deeper than memory. The playful promise of childhood had grown into something real, meaningful, and alive. They could feel it in the quiet glance, the small smile, and the gentle touch of hands brushing against one another. Amina noticed how much Karim had changed, yet how much had stayed the same. He was stronger, wiser, and more patient, but the warmth, kindness, and humor that had drawn her as a child remained. And Karim noticed that Amina had grown into a young woman of confidence, intelligence, and grace. Yet the boldness, courage, and spirit of the little girl he had once laughed with were still there, shining brightly in her eyes. They walked through the village, talking quietly, sometimes laughing, sometimes simply observing the world around them. It was as if they were discovering each other for the first time, yet everything felt familiar. Every stone, every tree, every turn of the path carried echoes of their shared past, making the reunion both magical and comforting. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Karim and Amina returned to the riverbank. The water reflected the sky's colors, and the gentle sound of flowing water seemed to speak of continuity and hope. Karim took a deep breath and looked at her with a mixture of pride, affection, and something more profound. You've grown into an incredible person, he said softly. I am glad that fate has brought you back here. Amina felt her heart quicken. I am glad too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I would never see this place or you again. Karim reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The touch was familiar yet new, carrying the weight of memories and the promise of a future that had been waiting quietly for decades. They both smiled, understanding in that single moment that their bond had survived time, distance, and the changes of life. The festival around them continued, full of music, laughter, and the joyful energy of the village. But for Karim and Amina, the world had narrowed to this quiet spot by the river, to the connection that had begun so many years ago with a playful promise. It was a reunion that neither had expected to be so powerful, so emotional, and so full of meaning. That night, as the stars appeared above the mountains, they sat together, talking softly, sharing memories, and imagining the days ahead. The mountains, silent and timeless, stood as witnesses to the reunion, a reminder that some bonds, no matter how long apart, could never be broken. Karim thought of the little girl who had promised to be his wife. He realized that the years had only strengthened the promise, turning it from a child's playful words into a connection that neither time nor distance could diminish. And Amina realized that the bold promise she had made so long ago had been more than just words. It had been the beginning of a story, one that was still unfolding, one that was more real than she had ever imagined. In the quiet of the night, beside the river that had always flowed, their hands remained together, and their hearts beat in quiet understanding. The reunion was not just a meeting of two people, It was a blending of past and present, of memories and hopes, and of a bond that had survived the passage of years. The festival would end, the villagers would return home, and life would continue. But for Karim and Amina, this reunion was the beginning of a new chapter. The playful promise of childhood had blossomed into a real, living connection, one that would guide them through the days to come, reminding them that sometimes the most important promises are the ones kept quietly, patiently, and with love. And so, the mountain man and the girl who had promised him her heart were together once again, standing by the river where their story had begun, ready to face the future with courage, laughter, and the deep, unspoken bond that had brought them back to each other. The morning after the festival was quiet, the village slowly waking to the soft light spilling over the mountains. Amina woke with a feeling she could not explain. Her heart was restless, full of anticipation and warmth. After so many years, she had finally seen Karim again. The boyish laughter and playful promise from her childhood had transformed into something real, something that tugged gently at her heart. She wondered if he felt the same, and the thought made her both nervous and excited. Karim, too, woke with thoughts of Amina lingering in his mind. Even as he carried out his daily tasks, the memory of her smile and the feel of her hand in his stayed with him. He could not help but think of how life had moved so slowly, yet so perfectly, to bring them back together. The mountains, the river, and the village seemed to hum with quiet approval, as if they had been waiting for this moment for many years. That morning, they decided to walk together along the trails Karim had once shown her. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine filled their lungs. The paths were familiar to Karim, yet new to Amina in a different way. She was no longer the small child climbing rocks with curiosity. She was a young woman, seeing the mountains through both memories and fresh eyes. They walked in comfortable silence at first, the kind of silence that is not empty but full of unspoken thoughts. Karim glanced at Amina, noticing how she had grown, how her confidence and grace radiated naturally. She noticed him too, the way his presence carried quiet strength and calm, a sense of safety that no one else could provide. "I never realized how big the mountains look when you've been away for so long," Amina said softly, breaking the silence. Karim nodded. "They always seem to wait for us to notice them again," he replied. "They remind us of where we come from and sometimes of who we are." Amina smiled, feeling the weight of his words. It was strange yet comforting, how easily he understood her feelings without needing explanations. They came to a familiar clearing where wildflowers grew between the rocks, a place Karim had shown her years ago. They sat together, letting the quiet of nature surround them. "You've changed so much," Karim said quietly, watching her pick a small flower from the ground. "But some things about you never change. You are still brave, still bold, and still full of life." Amina felt a warmth spread in her chest. "I learned from you," she admitted. "You taught me to be brave, to trust myself, and to never be afraid to speak what I feel." Karim looked at her closely, seeing the young woman she had become. "And I have learned from you too," he said. "I have learned to remember the small joys, the laughter, and the importance of keeping promises. You reminded me that life is not just work and responsibility. It's also about connection and trust and courage." They spent the day together, walking the trails, exploring hidden corners of the mountains, and revisiting spots that had been special to them as children. Each place carried memories, and with each memory, their bond grew stronger. They laughed over small incidents from the past, Amina slipping in the river, falling into the soft moss, Karim helping her climb rocks, the silly arguments over which path to take. Those moments, simple and innocent, now had a depth that made them more meaningful than ever. As the sun moved across the sky, casting golden light over the mountains, they came to the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley. The view was breathtaking, rolling green hills, the river glinting like silver and the village below, small but alive with activity. Karim leaned against the rock and Amina stood beside him, letting the wind brush past her face. "I always wondered if you would return," Karim said quietly. "I never stopped hoping, but I tried not to let myself expect it. Life has a way of keeping us busy, of moving us in directions we don't always choose." Amina nodded, understanding perfectly. "I wondered too," she admitted. "Even when I was far away, I thought of you and of the mountains. I thought of the promise I made as a child, and it kept me strong when life felt confusing." Karim's hand brushed against hers, almost by accident, and Amina felt a spark, a quiet recognition of something deeper than friendship. It was a touch that carried the weight of years, the memories of laughter and trust and the possibilities of what could come. "You know," Karim said softly, "there is something I've wanted to tell you for a long time. I never forgot your promise, and I never forgot you." Amina looked at him, her heart beating fast. "I never forgot either," she said. "Even when I was far away, I kept it in my heart. It wasn't just a child's promise. It was hope and something that reminded me of who I am." For a long time they sat together, watching the valley below, feeling the connection between them grow stronger. There was no need for words. The bond they had shared as children had matured into something real, something that went beyond memory, beyond distance, beyond years. Over the next few days, they spent nearly every moment together. Karim showed her secret spots in the mountains that no one else knew, taught her about the wildlife, and shared stories of the village that had passed since she had been away. Amina listened, fascinated, but also realized how much she had missed. The simple joy of walking with him, of sharing thoughts and laughter, of feeling understood without explanation. Villagers began to notice their closeness. Some whispered softly to each other, smiling at the reunion of two people whose bond had clearly survived time. But Karim and Amina paid little attention. Their focus was on each other, rediscovering the friendship and connection that had started so many years ago. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, they sat by the river again. The sound of the water, the rustling of the leaves, and the scent of pine created a peaceful cocoon around them. Karim looked at Amina, his expression serious yet gentle. "There is something I want to ask you," he said softly. "Not about promises, not about the past, but about us now." Amina's heart skipped a beat. "Us," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes," Karim said. "The bond we have, the connection, the trust, the memories, it is special. And I want to know if you feel the same way I do, if we can explore what this could be together." Amina felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. I do," she said quietly. "I have felt it since the moment we met again. The years apart made me realize how important you are to me, how much I care, and how much I've waited for this." Karim smiled, relief and happiness spreading across his face. He reached out, holding her hand gently but firmly. "Then we will take it slowly," he said. "We have already shared so much, and we will continue to build on that. No rush, no pressure, just us together, discovering what we mean to each other." They spent the night talking by the river, sharing their hopes, their fears, and their dreams for the future. The stars above the mountains seemed to shine brighter, reflecting the quiet joy and warmth that had grown between them. It was a night of understanding, of trust, and of a love that had been waiting patiently for decades to be recognized. In the days that followed, Karim and Amina explored the village together, laughed with old friends, and revisited every trail, rock, and riverbank that held a memory of their past. The connection they shared deepened with every step, every glance, and every shared smile. They realized that what had begun as a playful promise in childhood had grown into a bond of trust, respect, and affection that neither could deny. By the time Amina had to leave the village again, their relationship had blossomed into something undeniable. They were no longer just the mountain man and the little girl who had promised to be his wife. They were two people bound by years of memories, by trust, and by the quiet, persistent pull of the heart. They said their goodbyes by the river, promising to see each other again soon, knowing that distance could not weaken what they had rediscovered. As Amina walked away, she turned back once, seeing Karim standing by the river, his silhouette framed by the golden light of the setting sun. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment they both understood. Their story was far from over. The mountains, the river, and the bond they shared had guided them back to each other. And now, together, they would continue to explore the possibilities of love, friendship, and destiny. And so, their journey continued, not as children bound by a playful promise, but as young adults discovering the depth of a connection that had survived the passage of time, the challenges of life, and the quiet test of patience. The bond they shared had grown stronger, more meaningful, and ready to carry them into the next chapter of their lives together. Time moved gently in the mountain village, but for Amina and Karim, every moment seemed fuller, richer, and more alive than ever before. After the festival and their reunion, they had spent weeks together, walking the familiar trails, revisiting hidden corners of the mountains, and sharing stories of their lives apart. Every laugh, every glance, every quiet moment together deepened the bond that had started decades ago with a child's bold promise. Amina felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as the day of her final visit approached. She had been away from the mountains for many months, studying and taking care of responsibilities in the town. Now, she was returning, ready to spend more time with Karim and perhaps ready to confront the feelings that had grown quietly in her heart over the past months. Karim, too, felt a sense of anticipation. He had grown accustomed to the thought of Amina being near him again, her presence brightening his days and bringing warmth to his quiet life. He often thought of the first day she had run to him as a child, the day she had made a promise that had carried through 20 years. Now, that promise was no longer a distant memory. It was real, and it had the potential to shape both their futures. When Amina arrived, the mountains welcomed her with open arms. The river glittered under the morning sun, the pines swayed gently in the wind, and the village seemed more alive than ever. She took in the familiar sights with a sense of nostalgia, but also with hope. Hope that this time, things would be different. Hope that the bond she had cherished in her heart for so long would finally find its true place. Karim met her at the edge of the village, as he always did. The sight of her brought a smile to his face, the kind that reached his eyes and made them shine with emotion. Amina's heart skipped a beat as she ran toward him, the years of longing and distance dissolving with every step. "You're here," Karim said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "I was hoping you would come back." "I promised," Amina replied, smiling, "and I always keep my promises." They walked together in silence for a while, enjoying the morning air and the quiet beauty of the mountains. Every tree, every rock, every path held memories of their shared past. Amina felt the weight of the years lift as she walked beside Karim, the connection between them more real and more profound than ever before. As the day went on, they visited their favorite spots, the riverbank where they had first shared the playful promise, the hidden clearing where wildflowers grew between the rocks, and the cliffs overlooking the valley. Each place seemed to celebrate their reunion, carrying the echoes of their laughter, the whispers of their conversations, and the quiet presence of their shared memories. In the afternoon, they reached a small, secluded spot in the mountains, one that Karim had always loved. The view was breathtaking, with the river winding below and the sun casting golden light across the peaks. Karim turned to Amina, his expression serious yet gentle. "There is something I need to say," he began, taking her hands in his. "Not just as the mountain man you promised all those years ago, but as someone who has grown to care deeply for you, someone who cannot imagine life without you." Amina's heart raced. She had felt this moment coming, but hearing the words spoken aloud made it real. I feel the same," she whispered. "I have felt it for a long time. From the moment we reunited, I knew that what we have is more than just memories, it's something real, something that belongs in the present. Karim's eyes softened. Then there is no need for hesitation, he said. We have waited long enough. The promise you made as a child, it has stayed with me, and now it is time to honor it. Will you be with me, not just as a memory, but as a partner in life, as someone I can share my days, my mountains, and my heart with? Tears welled up in Amina's eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming happiness. She nodded, unable to find words at first, and then said softly, "Yes, I will be with you." Karim smiled, and together they embraced, the mountains surrounding them like silent witnesses to a promise fulfilled. It was not just a reunion. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that had been waiting patiently for decades to be written. They spent the rest of the day preparing for a small, heartfelt ceremony. Villagers who had known them since childhood gathered, smiling warmly as they witnessed the union of two people whose bond had survived time, distance, and the challenges of life. Friends and family decorated the clearing with flowers, colorful ribbons, and lanterns, celebrating not just the present but the story of a promise kept through the years. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Karim and Amina stood together in the clearing. Their hands were clasped, their hearts full of joy, and their eyes locked in silent understanding. The villagers watched quietly, sensing the depth of the connection and the history that had brought them to this moment. Karim spoke first, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "Amina," he said, "I have carried your promise in my heart for 20 years. I laughed at it as a child, but I never forgot it. Today, I am grateful that life has brought us back together, so that I can keep this promise with all my heart." Amina smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And I have carried it too," she said softly. "Even when I was far away, even when life seemed uncertain, I never forgot. Today, I am grateful to be here with you, to honor the promise I made as a child, and to start a new life together." They exchanged simple vows, heartfelt words spoken quietly but with immense sincerity. It was not a grand ceremony, but it was perfect in its simplicity, reflecting the purity of their bond and the journey that had brought them together. The mountains, the river, and the sky bore witness to a love that had been nurtured over decades, a love that had grown quietly and patiently, waiting for the right moment to be recognized and celebrated. After the vows, they released a handful of wildflowers into the river, letting them float downstream. It was a symbolic gesture, representing the journey of their lives, the flow of time, and the enduring nature of promises made with love. Amina and Karim watched the flowers drift away, feeling a deep sense of peace and happiness. That evening, they walked hand in hand through the village, greeting friends and neighbors, sharing laughter and stories, and feeling the warmth of community and belonging. The mountains glowed under the moonlight, the river shimmered like silver, and the stars above seemed to shine brighter than ever, celebrating a story of love and promises fulfilled. As night fell, they returned to the riverbank where their story had begun so many years ago. The gentle sound of flowing water, the rustling of leaves, and the quiet beauty of the mountains created the perfect backdrop for the beginning of their life together. Karim held Amina close, feeling the warmth of her presence and the certainty that they had found what they had been seeking for so long, not just in each other but within themselves. "We have waited a long time," Karim said softly, "but it was worth it. Every year, every memory, every challenge, it all led us here." Amina rested her head against his shoulder. "Yes," she whispered, "and now we can create new memories together for the rest of our lives." They stayed by the river for hours, talking, laughing, and planning for the future. There was a sense of calm and joy that only comes from knowing that a long-held promise has finally been fulfilled. The mountains, the river, and the village were not just a backdrop. They were part of their story, part of the bond that had brought them together and would keep them together for years to come. In the days that followed, Amina and Karim continued to explore the mountains, care for the village, and spend quiet, meaningful moments together. Their bond grew stronger with every passing day, built on trust, shared memories, and the love that had been patiently waiting to bloom. They laughed together, supported each other, and embraced the joy of life in the mountains, knowing that their journey, which had started with a playful promise, had now become a beautiful reality. And so, the mountain man and the girl who had promised him her heart as a child were together at last. Their love was not hurried or forced. It was gentle, steady, and deeply rooted in years of trust, respect, and shared experiences. The mountains, the river, and the sky were silent witnesses to a story of patience, hope, and enduring love. A story that had begun with laughter and a promise, and had grown into a lifetime of happiness. In the quiet of the night, under a sky filled with stars, they held hands and looked out over the mountains. Both knew that life would have challenges, that time would continue to move forward, but they also knew that as long as they were together, they could face anything. The playful promise of childhood had become the foundation of a life filled with love, trust, and joy. And so, the story that began with a little girl's bold words, "When I'm big, I'll be your wife," came to its beautiful, heartfelt conclusion. It was a story of childhood innocence, enduring promises, reunion, and the power of love that transcends time. It was a story that would be remembered in the village for generations, not just for the promise itself, but for the strength, patience, and heart that turned a simple childhood vow into a lifetime of happiness.